before this life.
His name is Marcus, 7 years old, dark skin, bright, intelligent eyes, a quiet confidence that makes adults do double takes. He lives with his parents in a comfortable apartment in Chicago's South Side, but it's his voice that stops people in their tracks, not the high-pitched voice of a 7-year-old child. Something else, something deeper, richer, with a cadence and resonance that belongs to a professional broadcaster. A voice that has lived decades Marcus hasn't experienced. His mother, Diane, first noticed when Marcus was barely 4. He wasn't babbling like other toddlers. He was speaking in complete, articulate sentences with a rhythm that felt impossibly mature. "Good evening, Chicago," he would say, standing on a chair in the living room, holding a wooden spoon like a microphone. "You're listening to the sounds of the city. It's a beautiful night, and we've got some beautiful music lined up for you." Diane laughed at first. Her son was playing radio host. Adorable. Except he'd never watched radio broadcasts, never been exposed to old-time radio shows. Their home had streaming music, podcasts, but nothing from the era Marcus seemed to be channeling. The statements grew more specific. Marcus would describe the station where he worked, WNEW in New York City. The format, middle of the road, pop, standards, the Great American Songbook. The equipment, RCA ribbon microphones, Gates board, cart machines for commercials. "I worked the evening drive shift," Marcus explained one afternoon, his 7-year-old voice carrying the authority of a veteran broadcaster. 5 to 9. Rush hour. That's when you really connect with people. They're driving home from work. Tired. Stressed. Your voice becomes their companion. You have to understand that. You're not just playing music. You're providing comfort, company, a friendly voice in the chaos. Diane's husband, James, a high school music teacher with knowledge of radio history, began paying attention. His son was using terminology from 1,960 seconds broadcasting, technical vocabulary, professional insights about audience connection that no child should possess. Marcus demonstrated knowledge that seemed impossible. He could identify songs from the 1,960 seconds after hearing just a few notes. Not just the hits, deep album cuts, B-sides, obscure standards. He would name the artist, the year, the chart position, even the producer and session musicians. "That's Frank Sinatra, 1,966. Strangers in the Night," he would say with casual authority. "Arranged by Ernie Freeman." It was Frank's first #1 in 11 years. I played it constantly that summer. The audience loved it, even though Frank himself thought it was ridiculous. He called it a piece of garbage. But that's Frank, always honest. James tested him, played recordings from the era. Marcus identified everything correctly, knew stories about the artists, understood the context of when songs were popular and why. But the most unsettling aspect was how Marcus spoke about his work, not as a child playing pretend, as someone describing their career, their life. "I loved being on air," Marcus would say, his voice taking on a wistful quality. "That moment when the mic light goes on, and it's just you and thousands of people listening. You're in their cars, their kitchens, their bedrooms. You're part of their lives. That connection is sacred. You can't betray it. You have to be authentic, real." They can hear lies through the radio, but they can also hear truth, warmth, love. The nightmares began around his 5th birthday. Marcus would wake up, gasping, clutching his chest. "I can't breathe," he would sob. "My chest, it hurts. The pain. I was on air. I was introducing the next song. And then the pain. Sharp, like something tearing inside." I tried to keep talking, to finish the break, but I couldn't. The words stopped. And then everything stopped. He would describe it with visceral detail. The sensation of his heart seizing, the crushing pressure in his chest, the panic of knowing something was terribly wrong while being live on air with thousands listening, the desperate attempt to speak, to say something, to not leave dead air. Then darkness. "I died on air," Marcus stated with calm certainty one morning. "My name was Jack Riverside. I was 43 years old. I was doing my show on WNEW, and my heart gave out. Right there, in the studio, with the music playing and people listening. And everything I was, the voice, the connection, the love of the work, it just stopped." Diane contacted Dr. Sarah Chen, a psychologist at Northwestern University who had published research on unusual memory phenomena and childhood development. Dr. Chen arrived, expecting perhaps an overactive imagination, maybe exposure to vintage radio through grandparents or media the parents weren't aware of. What she encountered challenged every assumption she held about memory, voice, and identity. Marcus sat across from her and spoke, not with a child's voice, with a professional broadcaster's voice. Deep, warm, perfectly modulated. The kind of voice that commanded attention and trust. "Hello," he said, his vocal control remarkable. "My name is Marcus, but I remember being Jack Riverside. I remember the studio, the microphone, the listeners, the night my heart stopped mid-show, and I remember the voice. This voice. It was mine. It was who I was. And somehow, it's still mine." Dr. Chen felt something shift in her understanding of reality. This child was speaking with professional vocal technique, breath control, pitch variation, emotional resonance. Skills that take years to develop. Skills that Marcus, at 7 years old, shouldn't possess. "Marcus," she asked carefully, "can you tell me about Jack Riverside?" Marcus's eyes took on a distant quality, accessing memories from before his birth. Jack Riverside, born 1,924 inches Brooklyn, started in radio in the early 50s after serving in Korea. Worked his way up from small stations to WNEW by 1960, known for his warm voice and deep knowledge of music. Unmarried, lived for the work. The voice was everything. And on the 15th of March, 1967, while on air, I had a massive heart attack. 43 years old. Dead before the ambulance arrived. The music kept playing, but the voice was gone. And Problemant, 43, and Problemant. Dr. Chen wrote down the details. Jack, Riverside, WNEW, the 15th of March, 1967. Heart attack, on air. Everything could be verified or disproven. Everything was specific enough to research. She began the investigation that would transform this case from psychological curiosity to documented mystery. Dr. Chen spent weeks researching radio history archives, contacting former WNEW staff, and digging through New York broadcasting records. What she discovered matched Marcus's statements with unsettling precision. Jack Riverside, real person, real broadcaster, WNEW, AM, New York City. Evening drive host, 1,960 to 1,967. Died the 15th of March, 1967, of a massive coronary while on air during his regular shift. The New York Times obituary from the 16th of March, 1967. Jack Riverside, whose warm voice welcomed millions of New York commuters home each evening on WNEW, died last night while broadcasting. He was 43. Station engineers reported that Riverside collapsed at approximately 7:47 p.m. while introducing a record. The music continued to play while station staff rushed to his aid, but he was pronounced dead at the scene. His final words to listeners were, "And now, a beautiful," before the sentence was left unfinished. Dr. Chen sat in the Northwestern Library archives, staring at the microfilm. Marcus had described this exactly. The death on air, the unfinished introduction, the music playing while the voice stopped, the age, the date, everything. She found more. Broadcasting trade publications from the 1,960 seconds, articles about WNEW's programming, reviews mentioning Jack Riverside specifically, descriptions of his voice, warm and conversational, like a trusted friend, the sound of home, The Museum of Television and Radio in New York had archived recordings, WNEW air checks from the 1,960 seconds. Dr. Chen requested access to any surviving recordings of Jack Riverside's broadcasts. 3 weeks later, she received a package. Digital transfers of 7 hours of archived Jack Riverside air checks from 1,965 to 1,967. His voice preserved, waiting to be compared to the voice coming from a 7-year-old child in Chicago. Dr. Chen set up a session with Marcus and his parents. She played the recordings without telling Marcus whose voice it was, just asked him to listen and respond. The first recording started. A smooth, professional voice filled the room. Good evening, New York. This is Jack Riverside, and you're listening to WNEW 1130 on your AM dial. It's 5 o'clock on a Tuesday, and I've got some beautiful music to ease you through the evening commute. Let's start with Tony Bennett. Marcus went rigid. Tears streamed down his face. That's me. That's my voice. That was me. His parents stared in shock. The voice on the recording and the voice Marcus used when he spoke in his broadcaster mode were remarkably similar. Not identical. Marcus was 7. His vocal cords physically smaller, but the cadence, the rhythm, the warmth, the professional technique all present in both voices. Dr. Chen played more recordings. Marcus narrated along, providing context for each segment. That's from summer 1966. I remember that show. I played a lot of Sinatra that night because I'd just learned about his fight with the columnist at the bar. I wanted to remind listeners that Frank was more than gossip. He was an artist. That's winter 1965. You can hear I'm fighting a cold. I didn't want to call in sick. Never missed a show if I could help it. The listeners depended on consistency. That's March 1967. 2 weeks before I died. I sound tired. I was tired. My chest had been bothering me for months. I should have seen a doctor, but I kept putting it off. Work came first. Always work. Every contextual detail Marcus provided could be verified against historical records. Articles about Sinatra's altercation in 1966. Weather records showing New York cold snaps in winter 1965. Broadcasting logs showing Jack Riverside's perfect attendance record. Dr. Chen arranged for Marcus to visit a vintage radio museum with working 1,960 seconds broadcast equipment. With the family's permission, she would observe his interaction with authentic period technology. At the museum, Marcus walked directly to a vintage RCA 77DX ribbon microphone, the type used in 1,960 seconds radio stations. "This was my microphone," he said quietly, touching it with reverence. The 77DX, best voice mic ever made. Warm, natural, forgiving. You could talk right into it, inches away, and it would capture every nuance. Modern mics are too bright, too harsh. This mic understood voice. The museum curator, a former broadcaster himself, watched in amazement. "How do you know that?" "About the proximity and warmth?" "Because I used one for 7 years," Marcus said simply. "Every day, 5 to 9. It was my instrument. I knew exactly how to position myself, how to control my breath, how to use the mic's characteristics to create intimacy with the listener." He moved to the broadcast console, pointed to various controls without being told what they were. Master gain, EQ, compression, microphone input. These are the cart machines for commercials and jingles. You'd have them pre-cued, ready to fire. Timing was everything. You had to hit the post precisely. Start talking the second the music faded. Fire the cart on cue. It was like conducting an orchestra. When you got it right, it was beautiful. The curator was visibly shaken. "He's describing professional broadcast technique from the 1,960 seconds. The kind of knowledge you only get from years in the booth. How is this possible?" Dr. Chen had no answer. She documented everything. Marcus's vocal similarity to Jack Riverside, his technical knowledge of period equipment, his encyclopedic music knowledge matching a 1,960 seconds DJ's professional expertise, his emotional responses to hearing his own voice from before his birth. She contacted former WNEW staff, found a retired engineer who had worked with Jack Riverside, arranged a phone call with Marcus without telling the engineer the situation beforehand. "Hello," the elderly man answered. "Hi, this is Marcus," the boy said. Then, slipping into his broadcaster voice, "But you knew me as Jack Riverside. We worked together at WNEW. You were the evening engineer. You kept everything running while I talked." A long silence. Then, "Who is this? How do you know that name?" "Because I was him. I remember you. I remember the studio. I remember the night I died, and you tried to help me. You called the ambulance. You stayed with me until they arrived, even though I was already gone." Another long pause. Jack's voice. "You sound like it's impossible, but you sound like Jack. How?" The conversation lasted an hour. Marcus describing details about the studio, the work routine, the relationship between DJ and engineer. The retired engineer confirming everything, increasingly emotional, increasingly convinced he was somehow speaking to the colleague he'd watched die 57 years ago. Dr. Chen arranged something extraordinary. With permission from Marcus's family and cooperation from broadcasting historians, they would visit New York. Marcus would see the building where WNEW had broadcast, now converted to other uses. He would visit the Museum of Television and Radio. He would meet with radio historians who specialized in 1,960 seconds New York broadcasting. The trip would test whether Marcus's memories were genuine or somehow constructed from available information. The flight to New York was revealing. As the plane descended, Marcus pressed his face to the window, staring at the city skyline. "It's different," he said quietly. "Taller, more buildings, but the shape is the same. The rivers, the bridges, that's my city. I loved New York. The energy, the diversity, the stories. Every caller had a story. Every listener had a life. That's what made the work meaningful." From JFK Airport, they took a car into Manhattan. Marcus navigated from memory, pointing out landmarks. "That's the Ed Sullivan Theater. I was there once to watch a taping. 1964, the Beatles' first appearance. Changed everything about music and radio. That's Carnegie Hall. I broadcast a remote from there in 1965. A Sinatra concert. The acoustics were perfect. You could feel the room through the microphone. Every reference was historically verifiable. The Beatles on Ed Sullivan, the 9th of February 1964. Sinatra at Carnegie Hall, April 1965. They arrived at 565 Fifth Avenue, the former location of WNEW studios. The building stood, but the radio station was long gone, relocated and eventually absorbed into other corporate entities. Marcus stood on the sidewalk, staring up. "This is it. This is where I worked, where I died. 9th floor. The studios were on the 9th floor. My booth was on the east side. Windows facing 5th Avenue. I could see the street between songs. Watch people living their lives. Sometimes I'd describe what I saw. Make the listeners feel like they were there, with me." Dr. Chen checked historical records. WNEW studios had indeed been on the 9th floor, east side, windows facing 5th Avenue. Details not easily found online. Details Marcus shouldn't know. Inside the building, now office space, Marcus moved with strange familiarity. The elevators were there. The reception desk was there, by those windows. The sales department was down that hall. And the studios. If we could go up. With special permission from building management, they accessed the 9th floor. The space was completely renovated, unrecognizable as a radio station. But Marcus walked directly to a specific location. "Here," he said, standing in what was now a generic office cubicle farm. "This was my booth. I sat here. The microphone was here. The turntables there. The cart machines to my right. The clock straight ahead so I could watch the time. And the window. The window was right there." He walked to the window, stared out at 5th Avenue. "I remember this view. This exact view. Thousands of times. Every evening. Watching the city while I worked. This was my world." Tears streamed down his 7-year-old face. not a child's tears. The grief of an adult, mourning a life lost, a career ended, an identity erased. At the Museum of Television and Radio, curators had prepared a special display, photographs of WNEW studios from the 1,960 seconds, equipment, promotional materials, and a listening station with Jack Riverside's archived broadcasts. Marcus walked through the exhibit like someone visiting their own memorial. He identified equipment, corrected small errors in the captions, provided context for photographs. That's the main studio. That's where the morning show broadcast from. That's the news booth. And that's mine. The evening studio. Evening studio. That's the main studio. Look, that's the 77DX mic I told you about. That's my chair. That's where I sat for 7 years. He stopped at a promotional photograph. Jack Riverside, circa 1965. A handsome black man in his early 40s, wearing a suit, sitting at the broadcast console with headphones on, smiling at the camera. Marcus stared at the photograph for a long time, then touched it gently. That's me. That's what I looked like. Different face, different body, but same soul, same voice, same love of the work. I was happy in that moment. You can see it. I loved what I did. I loved the connection with listeners. I thought I'd do it forever. I didn't know I only had 2 more years. Diane held her son, watching him mourn for himself, for a life cut short, for a voice silenced too soon. Dr. Chen had arranged one more meeting. A woman named Dorothy Chen, no relation to Dr. Chen, who had been Jack Riverside's producer at WNEW. Now in her 80s, she had agreed to meet Marcus via video call, curious about the claims but deeply skeptical. The call connected. Dorothy appeared on screen, an elegant elderly woman, sharp eyes, skeptical expression. "So you think you're Jack Riverside?" she said, her tone challenging. Marcus looked at the screen. His voice shifted, not quite his child voice, not quite his broadcaster voice, but something in between. Warm, familiar, full of recognition. "Hi, Dorothy. Still keeping everyone in line, I see. You were always the organized one. I was the creative chaos. You made me look professional, kept me on schedule, saved me from myself more times than I could count." Dorothy's expression shifted. "What? How do you know that? About the chaos?" "Because you told me constantly," Marcus said, a gentle smile appearing. "You'd say, 'Jack, you're a brilliant broadcaster and an organizational disaster.' If I didn't keep you on track, you'd miss your own show. And you were right. I lost track of time. Got too deep into conversations with callers. You'd have to wave frantically through the glass to get my attention. I drove you crazy, but we were a good team." Dorothy's hand went to her mouth. Those are things only someone who worked with Jack would know. Inside, jokes, personal dynamics. How? Because I was Jack. I am Jack. Or I was. I don't fully understand it, but I remember you. I remember the work. I remember dying and leaving you with the mess to clean up. I'm sorry about that, by the way. Sorry I didn't get to say goodbye properly." Dorothy was crying now. His voice. "You don't sound exactly like him. You're a child, but the way you speak, the rhythm, the warmth, it's Jack. Somehow, impossibly, it's Jack." The conversation lasted over an hour. Marcus and Dorothy discussing shows, memorable moments, inside jokes about other staff. Everything Marcus said matched Dorothy's memories perfectly. Dr. Chen's documentation of Marcus's case attracted attention from consciousness researchers, radio historians, and voice specialists. She compiled a comprehensive report of verified details. Accurate biographical information about Jack Riverside. Correct details about WNEW studios, equipment, and operations. Encyclopedic knowledge of 1,960 seconds music matching a professional DJ's expertise. Voice characteristics remarkably similar to archived recordings. Recognition of locations, people, and personal dynamics. Technical broadcast knowledge from the 1,960 seconds. Emotional responses consistent with genuine memory. Voice analysis specialists compared Marcus's speaking patterns to Jack Riverside's archived broadcasts. While the fundamental frequency was higher, Marcus's vocal cords were smaller, the prosody, rhythm, and intonation patterns showed remarkable similarities. Marcus was unconsciously mimicking vocal patterns that would normally take years of professional training to develop. Dr. Chen wanted to explore something deeper: the voice itself. Why had this particular aspect, the professional broadcaster's voice, survived so strongly when other details might fade? She arranged sessions focusing on Marcus's relationship with his voice, what it meant to him. "The voice was who I was," Marcus explained, with 7-year-old earnestness carrying adult understanding. Jack Riverside wasn't just a name, it was a sound, a feeling. When people heard that voice, they felt something. Comfort, connection, home. That's what I built. Not with my face. Radio is invisible. Not with my body, they couldn't see me. With my voice. The voice was everything. He struggled to articulate something profound. When Jack died, the body stopped, the heart stopped. But the voice was more than just vibrating air. It was intention. Love, connection. Maybe that's what survived. Not just memories of being Jack, but the essence of what Jack was. And Jack was voice. Dr. Chen documented this. The voice as identity. The professional tool that became the definition of self. Perhaps that's why it transferred so completely. Because for Jack Riverside, voice wasn't just something he had, it was something he was. Marcus continued performing, not consciously trying to be Jack Riverside, but unable to completely separate from those skills. His school teachers commented on his unusual speaking ability. He was chosen for every presentation, every public speaking opportunity. His voice commanded attention in ways that other children's didn't. James, his father, began working with Marcus on vocal development, not to exploit the phenomenon, but to help his son understand and channel this gift. They practiced breathing techniques, vocal exercises, proper microphone technique. "It's like he already knows this," James told Dr. Chen. "I'll start to teach him something, and he'll say, 'Yes, that's right,' like this, and demonstrate perfect technique. He's learning and remembering simultaneously. Or maybe just remembering things he already knew." Dr. Chen arranged for Marcus to visit a contemporary radio station, a podcast studio with modern equipment. She wanted to see how he'd adapt historical knowledge to current technology. Marcus examined the modern microphone, a Shure SM7B digital audio interface, computer-based recording. It's different, more complicated in some ways, simpler in others. No tape, no carts, everything digital. But the fundamental principle is the same. Voice to microphone to listener. The technology changes. The connection doesn't. They let him record a short segment. Just an introduction, like he used to do. Marcus sat at the microphone, adjusted his position, checked his distance, put on headphones. And when the record light came on, he transformed. "Good evening. This is Marcus. But not so long ago, I was someone else. I had a different name, a different life, a different body. But I had this voice. Or this voice had me. And I used it to connect with people. To share music. To be a friend in the darkness of their evening commute. That work ended suddenly. One night in 1967, when my heart gave out mid-broadcast. But somehow, the voice survived. Found its way back. Found a new body. And I'm still here. Still speaking. Still connecting. Because that's what voices do. They endure." The station staff stood in silence, listening to this 7-year-old child deliver a monologue with professional-level vocal control and emotional depth. "How is this possible?" the station manager whispered to Dr. Chen. "I don't know," she admitted. "But it is." The recording was shared online. It went viral. Millions of people heard Marcus's voice and felt something. Recognition. Connection. The same quality that Jack Riverside had provided in the 1,960 seconds, now channeled through a child in the 2,020 seconds. Radio historians reached out. They wanted to include Marcus's story in archives about WNEW and 1,960 seconds broadcasting. Not as proof of reincarnation, they couldn't make that claim, but as a remarkable case of historical continuity, a voice that bridged eras. Dorothy, Jack's former producer, stayed in contact with Marcus and his family. She sent recordings, photographs, memorabilia from the WNEW era. She told stories about Jack that weren't in public records, personal things, quirks, and habits. Marcus confirmed them all, adding his own details. "He remembered my coffee order," Dorothy said during one call, crying. "I mentioned it once, and Marcus said, 'Black, 2 sugars,' in the white mug with the WNEW logo. That was my mug. My exact order. Something only Jack would know because he saw me drink it every day. How does a child in Chicago know what coffee mug I used 60 years ago?" Today, Marcus is 9 years old. His memories of being Jack Riverside are beginning to fade, as they often do in these cases. The specific details blur. The emotional intensity softens. But the voice remains. That deep, resonant, professional broadcaster's voice. It hasn't faded. If anything, it's grown stronger as Marcus's body matures, his vocal cords developing to accommodate the sound that seems to want to emerge. "I don't remember everything anymore," Marcus admits. "Sometimes I forget the names of songs I used to know. Sometimes I can't picture the studio as clearly. But when I speak, especially when I speak to connect with people, the voice knows what to do. It's like muscle memory or soul memory. It's just there." His parents have embraced his gift, not as a circus act, but as something meaningful. Marcus has started a podcast, Age Appropriate, with his parents' supervision, where he talks about music history, interviews older musicians, and shares stories from different eras. His voice draws listeners. Young people who've never experienced old-time radio find themselves captivated by this child who speaks with wisdom and warmth beyond his years. Older listeners hear echoes of the radio personalities they grew up with. Everyone feels the connection. "It's the same thing Jack did," James says, "using voice to create intimacy, to make people feel less alone. Marcus is doing that now, not as Jack, as Marcus, but carrying forward what Jack knew, what Jack was." The case has profound implications for our understanding of consciousness and identity. If Marcus truly carries Jack Riverside's vocal essence, it suggests that what we are, our skills, our gifts, our unique way of connecting with others, might transcend the physical brain. Science offers no complete explanation. Vocal patterns developed over years shouldn't appear in a child. Professional broadcasting techniques shouldn't spontaneously manifest. An identity so tied to sound shouldn't survive across death and rebirth. And yet, Marcus speaks with Jack's cadence. He understands broadcasting with Jack's expertise. He connects with listeners through Jack's warmth. He carries forward a professional voice that silenced in 1967 but somehow found its way back. Perhaps consciousness is more than neurons and vocal cords. Perhaps what we truly are, our essence, our gift, our unique way of touching others, transcends physical form. Perhaps death cannot silence what the soul knows how to express. Jack Riverside died mid-broadcast, his last words unfinished. And now, a beautiful. The sentence cut off. The music played. The voice stopped. But perhaps the sentence wasn't left unfinished. Perhaps it continues now, decades later, through a child who carries the voice forward. And now, a beautiful continuation, a new chapter, a voice that found its way back. Radio is invisible. You can't see the broadcaster. You only hear the voice. And voice, perhaps, is more permanent than we imagine, more tied to consciousness itself than to any particular body. Marcus stands at his podcast microphone, preparing to record. He adjusts the position, checks his levels, puts on headphones, and when he speaks, it's not just Marcus speaking. It's something older, something that has learned across lifetimes how to use sound to touch souls. "Good evening," he says, and the voice fills the space. "Thank you for listening, for being here, for allowing me to be part of your day." That connection across time, across death, across whatever boundaries we imagine separate us. That connection is what matters. That's what endures. The broadcast continues. The voice lives on. And somewhere, in the space between silence and sound, Jack Riverside smiles. If this story touched you, if it made you question what you thought you knew about voice, identity, and the gifts that transcend individual lifetimes, you're not alone. Every week, we explore another mystery, another child, another impossible memory that challenges everything we understand about life, death, and the nature of the soul. Subscribe to Before This Life. Join thousands of truth seekers in this journey, because some questions are worth asking, some mysteries deserve our wonder, and some stories need to be heard. What's your theory about Marcus's voice? Have you experienced unexplained abilities that seem to come from beyond your current life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's explore this together. This has been Before This Life.